It was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday when my son came home drunk. Not just tipsy, the kind of drunk that changes his eyes into someone I didn't recognize. The kind of drunk that made the pictures of his childhood on our walls feel like artifacts from another lifetime. I heard him stumbling up the stairs, cursing under his breath. The same stairs he'd raced up as a little boy with scraped knees and Superman pajamas. Now 22 years old, with broad shoulders and a temper that had been growing like a weed in our home. "Mom," he slurred, standing in the kitchen doorway. "Where's my money?" His words were sharp, edged with something I'd never heard from him before. Contempt. "Marcus, baby, you know I don't keep cash in the house," I said, keeping my voice calm like I'd learned to do over these past few months. "The way you speak to a wild animal, firm but not threatening." He slammed his hand against the door frame. "Don't baby me. I need money. You always do this. Act like you care but you never help me." The accusation stung deeper than I wanted to admit. This was my son, the boy I'd worked double shifts for, the young man I'd prayed over every night, the child whose father left us but I swore I'd never abandon. "Let's talk in the morning," I said, moving toward him with hands raised, the universal sign of peace. "I'll make you some coffee, Anne." That's when it happened. His hand, the same hand that used to hold mine crossing the street, that used to make clumsy Mother's Day cards, that used to wave at me from the school bus window, that hand connected with my face. The shock came before the pain. The utter disbelief that the child I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through fevers, cheered at graduations, that he could look at me and see something worth hitting. I stumbled back, my hip connecting with the kitchen counter. The pain was sharp, immediate, but it was nothing compared to the shattering happening inside my chest. For a moment we both froze. His eyes widened with what might have been horror, but then it was gone, replaced by defiance. "You made me do that," he whispered, his breath smelling of cheap beer and poor choices. Then he turned and staggered to his room, leaving me standing in the kitchen that suddenly felt like foreign territory. Alone, I slid down the cabinets until I was sitting on the cold tile floor. My fingers traced the already swelling skin on my cheek. The physical pain was manageable. But the other pain, the mother pain that comes when your child becomes your attacker, that was a different kind of wound. I thought about calling the police. I had every right to. But something stopped me. This wasn't just some stranger, this was my Marcus. My baby who used to cry when cartoon characters got hurt. My teenager who stood up for bullied kids at school. My son who'd somehow gotten lost in a world of anger and entitlement. Tears came then. Not the quiet, dignified tears of movie scenes, but the ugly, gut-wrenching sobs of a mother whose heart was breaking in real time. I cried for an hour there on the floor. Cried until my body felt hollowed out. Cried until there were no tears left. And then something shifted. The grief began to harden into something else. Something steely and determined. I stood up, my body aching but my mind suddenly clear. I looked around our kitchen, at the photos of Marcus as a smiling child, at the refrigerator covered with his old drawings, at the familiar comfort of our home that had just been violated. And I made a decision. I wouldn't call the police. Not yet. I wouldn't scream or throw him out. Not immediately. I would do something much more powerful. I would teach my son the hardest lesson of his life. One he would never forget. I went to the bathroom and cleaned my face. The mark was already turning purple. A perfect handprint of betrayal. I took a photo with my phone, documenting the evidence. Then I applied concealer, hiding the visible proof but not the memory. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a victim. I saw a mother who had reached her limit. I saw a woman who was about to redefine what justice looked like. The plan formed in my mind as I moved through the dark house. It was risky. It was unconventional. But it was the only way I could think of that might actually save my son instead of just punishing him. I spent the rest of the night preparing, making phone calls, setting things in motion, planning the breakfast that would change everything. By the time the sun began to rise, I was standing in the kitchen again, but this time I wasn't crying. I was cooking. The bacon sizzled in the pan. The coffee brewed. The eggs scrambled. And with each movement I fortified my resolve. When Marcus finally emerged from his room around 9 a.m., he looked sheepish, hungover, expecting my anger or my tears. He got neither. Instead I smiled. a calm, measured smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Good morning, son," I said, my voice steady. "I made your favorite cheesy scrambled eggs and bacon." He stared at me, confusion warring with relief on his face. "Mom, about last night." I held up a hand. "Let's not talk about that right now. Sit. Eat." He sat at the table we'd bought when he was 10, the one with the chip in the corner from when he tried to build a fort underneath it. He looked so young in that moment, so much like the boy he used to be that my heart ached. I placed the plate in front of him. The perfect breakfast, just like I'd made 1,000 times before. Golden eggs, crispy bacon, toast buttered exactly how he liked it. Then I placed my phone on the table beside his plate. "What's this?" he asked, his mouth full of eggs. "Justice, Marcus," I said calmly. "I'm serving you justice with your breakfast." I pressed play on the video I'd recorded earlier. The one that showed the 2 police officers waiting in the living room. The one that showed the intake coordinator from the rehab facility pulling into our driveway. The one that showed the packed suitcase by the door. His face went pale. "Mom, what is this?" "This is your intervention, son. And your choice." I leaned forward, my eyes locking with his. "You can go with the officers to file assault charges against yourself. Or you can go with Sarah here to get the help you clearly need." The shock on his face was almost comical. Almost. "But you can't." "I can," I said softly. "And I am. Because I love you too much to let you become the man who hit his mother last night." The breakfast sat between us, steaming and ordinary, while our lives changed forever in that kitchen. This is our story. The story of how a mother's love sometimes has to be tough enough to break what's broken in order to heal it. The story of how I served my son breakfast and justice in the same meal. And the story of how we both learned that real love doesn't always feel good, but it always does what's necessary. The silence in our kitchen was louder than any scream could have been. Marcus stared at the phone screen, then at the rehab coordinator now standing in our doorway, then back at me. His face cycled through emotions like a slideshow: confusion, anger, betrayal, and finally, a dawning understanding that his mother had just outplayed him at the game he didn't know they were playing. "Mom," he whispered, the words sounding small and childlike. "You set me up?" "No, baby," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "I'm setting you free from whatever demons have taken residence in your soul." Sarah, the rehab coordinator, stepped forward. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes that had seen this scene too many times. "Marcus, my name is Sarah. I'm from New Beginnings Recovery Center. Your mother loves you very much to be doing this." He pushed away from the table so violently that his chair screeched against the tile. The beautiful breakfast I'd cooked now looked like a prop in some terrible play. "I'm not going anywhere with you," he shouted, his eyes wild. "This is my house. You can't make me." That's when the 2 police officers stepped into the kitchen. Officer Miller, a veteran with gray at his temples, spoke with calm authority. "Son, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your mother has filed an assault report. Either you go voluntarily to get help, or you come with us to the station." The reality of the situation finally crashed over Marcus. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him like air from a punctured balloon. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. "You'd really send me to jail, Mom?" I met his gaze without flinching. "I'd really save your life, Marcus, even if you hate me for it." The next hour passed in a blur of paperwork and packed bags. Marcus moved like a zombie, his earlier defiance replaced by stunned compliance. I packed his suitcase with practiced hands, the same hands that had packed for summer camps and college dorm rooms. But this time I wasn't packing swim trunks or textbooks. I was packing my son off to rehab. When it was time to leave, he stood by the door, duffel bag in hand, looking so much like the little boy I'd sent to kindergarten that my heart threatened to crumble. "Mom," he said quietly, "will you visit me?" I reached out and cupped his face, my thumb gently avoiding the bruised area where he'd hit me. "Every visiting day, baby. I'll be there." As Sarah led him to the car, Officer Miller lingered behind. "Ma'am, that was one of the bravest things I've ever seen a parent do. Most people either enable or abandon. You found a third way." I nodded, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. Brave didn't quite capture the feeling of watching your child being driven away to treatment. It felt more like heart surgery without anesthesia. When the door closed, the silence in the house was deafening. I walked back to the kitchen and stared at Marcus's half-eaten breakfast. The congealed eggs, the cold bacon. It looked like the aftermath of a battle. And I suppose it was. I cleaned up mechanically, my movements robotic. Washed the plate. Wiped the table. Put away the butter. Each ordinary action felt surreal. Like I was an actor playing the role of mother in a play where the main character had just exited stage left. When the kitchen was spotless, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called in sick to work. Then I made another call I'd been putting off. "Mom," I said when my mother answered. "I need to tell you something about Marcus." The words came out in a rush, the drinking, the anger, the hit, the intervention. When I finished, there was silence on the other end. Then in that firm, no-nonsense tone only Southern grandmothers can master, she said, "Baby girl, you did right. Now come over here and let me feed you." Grief is always hungry work. At my mother's house, surrounded by the familiar scents of lemon polish and simmering greens, I finally broke down. The tears I'd been holding back since last night came pouring out, great, heaving sobs that shook my whole body. My mother didn't try to stop me or comfort me. She just held me and let me cry, her work-worn hand stroking my hair like she had when I was a little girl. When the storm passed, she handed me a handkerchief, a proper cloth one like she always carried. "Now," she said, "tell me everything from the beginning." So I did. I told her about the slow changes in Marcus over the past year, the new friends I didn't like, the missed family dinners, the money that went missing from my purse, the lies that started small but grew bigger each time. "I should have seen it sooner," I whispered, the guilt a heavy weight on my chest. "I should have done something earlier." My mother took my face in her hands, her eyes serious. "Listen to me, baby. Parenting is the only job where you're expected to be perfect, while working with materials you didn't choose. You did the best you could with what you knew. When you knew better, you did better. That's all any of us can do." She made me tea strong and sweet, the way she always did when life got hard. As we sat at her kitchen table, the afternoon light fading outside, she told me stories I'd never heard before. About my father's struggle with alcohol before I was born. About her own mother's tough love that saved my uncle from ruin. "Sometimes love has to be strong enough to break what's broken," she said, echoing my own thoughts from earlier. "Soft love enables. Tough love heals." That night, back in my empty house, I did something I hadn't done since Marcus was a baby. I went into his room and sat on his bed. The room still smelled like him. That particular blend of cologne and youth that mothers everywhere recognize. I looked at the trophies on his shelf from basketball seasons past. The graduation photo on his desk. The worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are on his nightstand. The book I'd read to him every night when he was small. "Where the wild things are," I whispered to the empty room. "That's where you've gone, my sweet boy. But I'm going to bring you home." I picked up his pillow and held it to my face, breathing in the scent of my son. And in that moment I made a promise to him, to myself, to whatever forces governed the universe. I would be the mother he needed, not the mother he wanted. I would endure his anger, his hatred, his blame, whatever it took to get him well. Because that's what mothers do. We walk through fire for our children, even when they're the ones holding the matches. The investigation into Marcus's life began in earnest the next day. While he was in detox at New Beginnings, I was digging through his room, looking for clues about how my happy boy had become the young man who could raise a hand to his mother. What I found broke my heart all over again. Hidden in a hollowed-out space behind his headboard, empty liquor bottles. Stuffed in his winter coat pockets, pills I didn't recognize. On his laptop, search history that showed he'd been researching how to hide addiction from family members. But the worst discovery was in the back of his closet, buried under old sweaters. A journal. The entries started a year ago, filled with the normal worries of a recent college graduate, job searches, student loans, relationship troubles. But as the months passed, the tone darkened. "Can't sleep again. The thoughts won't stop. Mom asked if I was okay. Lied and said yes. Always yes. The drinking helps quiet the noise in my head. Applied for 27 jobs this week. 27 rejections. Sometimes I look in the mirror and don't recognize myself. The final entry, dated 2 weeks ago, made me weep. I'm becoming everything I never wanted to be. The anger is eating me alive. Today I screamed at Mom for nothing. Saw the hurt in her eyes. I'm a monster. I hate myself. I closed the journal, my tears spotting the cover. My son wasn't just an addict. He was in pain. Deep, profound pain that he'd been hiding behind anger and alcohol. And I hadn't seen it. I'd seen the symptoms but missed the disease. That afternoon, I met with Sarah at New Beginnings for the family orientation. She explained the program, 30 days minimum, with therapy, group sessions, and family involvement. The first week is the hardest, she told me. Detox, withdrawal, facing the consequences of their actions. He's going to be angry. He's going to blame you. Are you prepared for that? I thought of the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The teenager who'd written me poems for Mother's Day. The young man who was now somewhere in this building, fighting demons I hadn't even known existed. I'm his mother, I said simply. I can handle his anger. I just want him back. She smiled. A sad, understanding smile. Then let's get to work. The visiting day couldn't come soon enough. When it finally arrived, I dressed carefully. Not too formal, not too casual. I wanted to look like his mother, not his warden. The facility was nicer than I'd expected. Bright, clean, with gardens and common areas that felt more like a campus than a treatment center. But the security measures reminded me that this wasn't a vacation. It was a necessity. When Marcus walked into the visiting room, my breath caught in my throat. He looked younger without the scowl he'd been wearing for months. Cleaner. Softer around the edges. But his eyes held a wariness that broke my heart. Hey, Mom, he said, not meeting my gaze. Hey, baby. I reached for him, but he flinched away. Don't, he said quietly. Just don't. We sat at a small table, a vase of fake flowers between us like some sad parody of a restaurant date. How are you? I asked, the words feeling inadequate. How do you think I am? He snapped, then seemed to catch himself. Sorry. Withdrawal's a bitch. We sat in silence for a moment before he spoke again. His voice low and strained. Why did you do it, Mom? Why the police? Why the public humiliation? I leaned forward, my eyes searching his. Because what you did wasn't a private mistake, Marcus. It was assault. And I love you too much to pretend it wasn't. I love you too much to enable you to become someone who hurts people. Tears filled his eyes, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him in months. I'm so sorry, Mom. About your face, about everything. I know, baby, I whispered. I know. We talked for an hour, stilted, careful conversation that danced around the big issues, but at least was conversation. When visiting hours ended, he stood to leave, then hesitated. Mom, he said, his voice small. Will you come back next week? Try and stop me, I said, smiling through my own tears. As I drove home, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I realized something had shifted. The crushing weight of guilt had lifted slightly, replaced by something that felt like hope. The road ahead would be long. There would be setbacks and struggles. The relationship we'd had before was gone forever, but maybe, just maybe, we could build something new. Something stronger. Something honest. My son had laid a hand on me, but I had laid down a lifeline. And as any mother knows, when your child is drowning, you don't ask if the water's cold before you jump in to save them. The third week of Marcus's treatment brought the storm I'd been warned about. It started with a phone call from Sarah at 2 a.m., her voice tight with urgency. Ms. Wilkins, Marcus had an incident tonight. He tried to leave the facility. I was out of bed before she finished speaking, my heart hammering against my ribs. Is he okay? Where is he now? He's safe, she said, but the hesitation in her voice told me there was more. He's in the medical wing for observation. But Amara, he was violent. He threatened staff, destroyed property. This is his addiction fighting back. I drove through the dark, empty streets, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The peaceful hope I'd felt after our last visit had evaporated, replaced by the cold fear that maybe some broken things couldn't be fixed. At New Beginnings, I found Marcus in a secured room, his wrists bandaged, his eyes wild and unfamiliar. When he saw me, his face twisted into something ugly and raw. "You," he spat. "This is your fault. You put me in this prison." The words hit me like physical blows, but I kept my voice calm. "I put you where you could get help, Marcus." "Help?" He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You call this help? Locking me up like an animal? Forcing me to talk about feelings I don't have?" He paced the small room like a caged tiger, all coiled energy and pent-up rage. "I had a job interview next week. A real chance. Now I'm stuck in here while my life falls apart." "Your life was already falling apart, son," I said softly. "That's why you're here." He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his eyes narrowed. "You think you're so perfect, don't you? Saint Amara, the long-suffering mother. Well, guess what? I'm not the only one with secrets in this family." The change in his tone made the hair on my arms stand up. "What does that mean?" He smiled, a cruel, knowing smile that didn't belong on my son's face. "Ask Dad why he really left. Ask him about the woman in Chicago. Ask him about the baby." The world tilted. "What are you talking about? Dad didn't just leave us for a job, Mom. He left us for a family. A real family. With a woman who wasn't too busy working double shifts to be a proper wife." I sank into the chair behind me, my legs suddenly unable to support me. How long have you known?" "Since I was 16, he said, his voice dripping with venom. "Dad told me when I visited him that summer. Said I was old enough to understand why he had to leave. Said you drove him away with your, what did he call it? Your emotional suffocation." Each word felt like a knife twisting in old wounds I thought had healed. My husband, my ex-husband, hadn't just abandoned us. He'd poisoned our son against me for years. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. Marcus's anger seemed to drain away, replaced by something worse, pity. "What would have been the point? You were already the tragic single mother. I didn't want to take that away from you." The revelation hung between us, ugly and sharp-edged. All these years, I'd thought I was protecting Marcus from his father's abandonment. Turns out, Marcus had been protecting me from a truth that would have shattered me. "I'm sorry," I said, the words inadequate. "I'm so sorry you carried that alone." "Don't." He turned away from me. "Don't try to mother me now. It's too late." Sarah found me in the hallway minutes later, trembling and nauseous. She guided me to her office, handed me water, and let me cry until I could breathe again. "The addiction will use anything to survive," she explained gently. "It will dig up old wounds, twist truths, exploit vulnerabilities. This isn't your son talking. This is the disease." But the distinction felt meaningless. Disease or not, the words had been spoken. The damage had been done. I drove home as the sun rose, the new day feeling heavy with revelations. My perfect narrative, the strong single mother raising her son against all odds, had been a fiction. We were just two broken people, orbiting each other's pain. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in 10 years. I called my ex-husband. "Amara," he answered, sounding surprised. "Is everything okay? Is Marcus? Did you tell our son you left us for another family?" I cut him off, my voice shaking with a decade of suppressed anger. The silence on the other end was answer enough. "David, how could you? He was 16 years old." He asked Amara. He wanted to know why I left. What was I supposed to say? That his mother and I fell out of love? That sometimes marriages just end? You were supposed to be the adult. I shouted, years of carefully maintained composure shattering. You were supposed to protect him. Instead, you made me the villain in your story. We argued for an hour. A decade of resentment and unspoken accusations pouring out in angry waves. When we finally exhausted ourselves, the truth lay between us, ugly and undeniable. "I'm sorry," David said finally, his voice weary. "I was angry and hurt and I took it out on you. It was wrong. I know that now. Your apology is 10 years too late," I whispered. "The damage is done." After we hung up, I sat in the deepening twilight, the ghosts of my failed marriage swirling around me. All these years I'd thought I was building a safe, stable life for Marcus. Instead, I'd been building it on a foundation of lies. His and mine. The next few days passed in a blur of grief and anger. I stopped visiting Marcus, too raw from his revelations and my conversation with David. I ignored Sarah's calls, too overwhelmed to face more truth. But truth, I was learning, has a way of demanding to be heard. On the 5th day, Sarah showed up at my house unannounced, her face set in determined lines. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Marcus is regressing. He's using your absence as proof that he was right, that you never really loved him." "That's not fair," I protested. "He's the one who—" "Amara," she interrupted gently, "this isn't about fair. This is about healing. And healing requires all the wounds to be cleaned out, not just the convenient ones." She handed me a folder. Inside were photocopies of Marcus's journal entries from therapy, raw, painful confessions that mirrored what I'd found in his room. "I'm so angry all the time. Angry at Dad for leaving. Angry at Mom for making him leave. Angry at myself for being angry. The drinking makes the anger quiet. For a little while, I hit my mother. I became the monster I always feared I was. She hasn't visited in a week. I knew she'd abandon me eventually. Everyone does." The last entry broke me. My son, sitting in a treatment center, still waiting for the other shoe to drop, still expecting to be abandoned. "I have to see him," I said, the decision crystallizing in my heart. Sarah nodded. "Good. But Amara? Be prepared. The unraveling has to happen before the rebuilding can begin. And it's going to get worse before it gets better." When I walked into the visiting room the next day, Marcus looked up with guarded hope in his eyes. "You came back," he said, sounding surprised. "I'll always come back," I said, taking the seat across from him. "No matter how hard you push me away, no matter what truths come out, I'm your mother. That's what we do." For the first time since he'd entered treatment, I saw my real son looking back at me, scared, vulnerable, and desperately in need of his mother. "Mom," he whispered, tears filling his eyes. "I'm so lost." "I know, baby," I said, reaching for his hand. This time he didn't pull away. "I know, but I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." As we sat there, hands clasped across the table, I understood that our healing wouldn't be a straight line. There would be more storms, more revelations, more pain. But for the first time, I believed we might weather them together. The unraveling had begun, but so had the mending. The 4th week of treatment brought the breakthrough we'd been desperately waiting for. It came not in a dramatic confession or tearful reunion, but in the quiet space between words during our family therapy session. Dr. Evans, Marcus's therapist, had requested my presence for what she called a significant session. When I arrived, Marcus was already seated, looking more clear-eyed than I'd seen him in years. The constant anger that had clouded his features had lifted, leaving behind something raw and vulnerable. "Amara," Dr. Evans began, "Marcus has been doing some important work around understanding the roots of his addiction and behavior. He'd like to share some of that with you today." Marcus took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. "Mom, I need to start by telling you the full truth about that night. The night I hurt you." I nodded, bracing myself. "I'm listening, baby." "It wasn't just about the drinking," he began, his voice low but steady. "That day, I got rejected from another job, the 7th one that month. Then I saw a post online. Dad with his other family. His daughter's birthday party. She was turning 8, and he was there being the father I never had. My breath caught. "Oh, Marcus." "No, let me finish," he said, his eyes pleading. "I went out drinking, and the whole time all I could think was that I was becoming him. A disappointment. A failure. And when I came home and you looked at me with that concerned face, I saw your disappointment too. And I just snapped." Tears streamed down his face now, but he didn't look away. "But here's what I've learned in here. That wasn't about you. That was about all the anger I've been carrying since I was 16. Anger at Dad for leaving. Anger at you for being human. For not being perfect. Dr. Evans nodded encouragingly. What else have you discovered about that anger, Marcus? That I used it as an excuse, he said, his voice growing stronger. An excuse to drink. An excuse to blame everyone but myself. An excuse to avoid growing up and taking responsibility for my own life. He turned to me fully now, his eyes clear and direct. Mom, what I did to you was unforgivable. I don't expect you to just get over it. But I want you to know that the person who hit you that night, that wasn't me. That was the addiction. That was the pain. And I'm working every day to make sure that person never comes back. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner and the beating of my heart. In that moment I saw not my angry son, not the addicted young man, but the child I'd raised, the one who knew right from wrong, who understood accountability, who was fighting his way back to himself. Marcus, I said, my voice thick with emotion, thank you for telling me the truth. All of it. But there was more truth to come, truth I needed to share. Now I need to tell you something, I continued, about why I reacted the way I did that next morning. Why I brought in the police and arranged for rehab instead of just talking to you. He looked curious. I figured you were just done with me. Never, I said fiercely. But when you hit me, it triggered something. Something I've never told you about. I took a deep breath, the memory I'd buried for 30 years surfacing with startling clarity. When I was 12 years old, I began, my father, your grandfather, hit my mother for the first and only time. I was in the next room listening. The next morning she made him breakfast, acted like nothing happened. And that became the pattern. He'd drink, he'd get angry, he'd hit her, and she'd pretend everything was fine. Marcus's eyes widened. Grandma? But they seemed so happy. Appearances can be deceiving, I said softly. That cycle continued for years until one day, he hit her hard enough to put her in the hospital. That's when she finally left him. I leaned forward, wanting him to understand. That morning after you hit me, I looked in the mirror and saw my mother. And I heard her voice telling me, don't let it start, Amara. Because if you let it start, you'll never stop it. So I didn't. I broke the cycle. The revelation hung between us. A family secret that had shaped generations now finally seeing daylight. Marcus looked devastated. All these years, you never told me. I wanted to protect you, I said. I wanted your childhood to be better than mine. But in trying to protect you from the past, I failed to prepare you for the present. Dr. Evans spoke gently. This is what we call intergenerational trauma. Patterns of behavior that get passed down until someone has the courage to stop them. Amara, by taking the action you did, you may have saved not just Marcus, but future generations of your family. The weight of her words settled over me. I thought I was just saving my son. I hadn't realized I was breaking a chain that stretched back through decades. The session lasted 2 hours, and by the end, we were both emotionally drained but spiritually lighter. For the first time, we weren't just mother and son. We were two people who had hurt each other, who had failed each other in different ways, but who were determined to do better. As we prepared to leave, Marcus hugged me. A real hug, not the stiff, perfunctory ones we'd exchanged in recent years. I'm proud of you, Mom, he whispered, for breaking the cycle, for being stronger than Grandma was, for being stronger than I am. You're plenty strong, I told him, holding him tight. It takes strength to face your demons like you're doing. That night, I called my mother and told her about our session. There was silence on the other end for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Mom? Are you there? Her voice when it came was thick with tears. All these years I carried the shame of what I let your father do to me. And I carried the fear that you'd repeat my mistakes. But you didn't, baby. You were stronger than me. No, Mom, I said gently. I just had your example to learn from. You showed me what not to do. That was your strength, making sure I didn't follow in your footsteps. We cried together, tears of healing, of forgiveness, of generations of women finally laying down their burdens. The next week brought more breakthroughs. Marcus completed his detox and moved into the main treatment program. He started group therapy and began helping newer residents adjust to the facility. In our sessions, he talked about his plans for after treatment, Going back to school, finding a sponsor, rebuilding his life on his terms, not as an escape from his father's shadow, but as an embrace of his own potential. During one visit, he showed me a letter he'd written to his father, not sent, just written for therapeutic purposes. In it, he expressed his anger, his hurt, but also his understanding that his father's choices were about his father's weaknesses, not Marcus's worth. "I'm not going to let him define me anymore, Mom," he said, his voice firm with new conviction. "And I'm not going to use his abandonment as an excuse to abandon myself." Watching him find his strength, I began to find my own. I started attending Al-Anon meetings for families of addicts, learning that I couldn't control Marcus's recovery, only support it. I began therapy myself, working through the trauma of that night and the deeper trauma from my childhood that it had triggered. One afternoon, while cleaning out my closet, I found the jacket I'd been wearing the night Marcus hit me. In the pocket was the receipt from the grocery store I'd visited earlier that day: milk, bread, eggs, the ordinary items of a life that had been anything but ordinary. I sat on the floor of my closet, holding that receipt, and finally let myself feel the full weight of everything that had happened. The fear, the anger, the betrayal, the love, all of it. And for the first time, I didn't try to push any of it away. I just let it be. Healing, I was learning, wasn't about forgetting the storm. It was about learning to dance in the rain that remained. As I prepared for Marcus to come home, truly come home, not just to a house but to himself, I understood that our journey was far from over. There would be good days and bad days. There would be triggers and temptations. There would be moments when the old patterns would try to reassert themselves. But we had something now that we hadn't had before: truth. Not the pretty, polished kind, but the messy, complicated, beautiful kind that sets you free even as it breaks you open. My son had laid a hand on me, and I had served him justice with his breakfast. But what we were both learning was that real justice isn't about punishment. It's about restoration. It's about creating the conditions where healing can occur. It's about having the courage to break what's broken so something new can grow in its place. And as any gardener knows, the most beautiful flowers often grow from the most broken soil. The day Marcus came home from treatment dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect spring morning that makes you believe in new beginnings. I stood in the kitchen preparing the same breakfast I'd made that fateful morning months ago. Cheesy scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, toast buttered exactly how he liked it. But this time everything was different. Sarah had called the night before with his discharge papers and final instructions. "Remember," she'd said, "recovery doesn't end when treatment does. This is when the real work begins." When I pulled up to New Beginnings, Marcus was waiting outside with his duffel bag, looking both older and younger than when he'd entered. The defensive hunch to his shoulders was gone, replaced by a straight-backed readiness that made my heart swell with pride. "Ready to go home, baby?" I asked as he slid into the passenger seat. He took a deep breath, looking at the facility one last time. "Ready to start living, Mom?" The drive home was quiet but comfortable, the easy silence of people who have said the hard things and don't need to fill space with noise. When we pulled into our driveway, he paused, looking at our house like he was seeing it for the first time. "It looks different," he said softly. "Or maybe we're different," I offered. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe that's it." I'd prepared his room, fresh sheets, clean surfaces, the window open to let in the spring air. But I'd also made changes. The empty liquor bottles were gone from their hiding places. The negative influences had been removed from his phone. The journal we'd found was on his desk, not as a reminder of his pain, but as evidence of his progress. Marcus walked through the house, touching things lightly: the photo of us at his high school graduation, the blanket we'd cuddled under during movie nights, the familiar cracks in the ceiling he'd traced as a boy unable to sleep. "It's good to be home," he said, and for the first time it sounded like he meant it. That first week was a delicate dance of establishing new routines while honoring old comforts. Marcus started attending daily AA meetings at the community center. I continued with my Al-Anon sessions. We began family therapy with Dr. Evans every Thursday. We were building a new relationship. Not mother and child, but two adults who loved each other, and were learning how to show it in healthy ways. One evening, about 2 weeks after he returned, Marcus cooked dinner for us, a slightly burned but perfectly seasoned chicken stir-fry. As we ate, he told me about his new sponsor, Michael, a former addict with 15 years of sobriety who ran a construction company. He offered me a job, Marcus said, his eyes bright with cautious hope. Starts as a laborer, but he says if I show up and work hard, there's room to grow. Marcus, that's wonderful, I said, trying to contain my excitement. What do you think? I'm scared, he admitted. What if I mess up? What if I'm not good enough? I reached across the table, taking his hand. Then you'll try again. That's what recovery is, showing up, even when you're scared. He started the following Monday, leaving the house at 6 a.m. in work boots and a tool belt, looking more like the man he was becoming than the boy he'd been. The job was hard, physical labor that left him exhausted but satisfied. Each evening, he'd come home with stories about what he'd learned that day. His hands bearing the blisters and calluses of honest work. The anger that had once clouded his features was being replaced by the quiet pride of accomplishment. But recovery, we were learning, isn't a straight line. One rainy Thursday, Marcus came home from work tense and withdrawn. He went straight to his room without speaking, something he hadn't done since before treatment. When he emerged an hour later, his eyes were red-rimmed. Rough day? I asked gently. He sank onto the couch beside me. We drove past Dad's office today. His other family was there, his wife, his daughter. She looks like me, Mom. She has my eyes. The pain in his voice was a physical thing in the room between us. I'm sorry, baby, I said, my heart aching for him. He saw me, Marcus continued, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked right at me, then turned away like I was a stranger. The old anger stirred in my chest, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about me. What did you do? I wanted to drink, he admitted. I drove past 3 liquor stores on the way home. But then I called Michael. We talked until the craving passed. The significance of what he'd done, choosing to reach out instead of reaching for a bottle, wasn't lost on either of us. I'm proud of you, I said, and meant it more than I ever had. He looked at me, his eyes clear despite the pain. Me too, Mom. For the first time in a long time, I'm proud of me too. As the weeks turned into months, we settled into our new normal. Marcus thrived at his job, earning a promotion to crew leader. I started dating again, cautiously, tentatively. A nice man from my Al-Anon group who understood that my son would always come first. One Saturday, we were in the kitchen making dinner together, something that had become our weekend tradition. When Marcus put down the knife he was using to chop vegetables and turned to me. Mom, I need to say something. He began, his voice serious. I've been thinking a lot about that night. About what I did to you. I started to speak, to tell him he didn't need to keep apologizing, but he held up a hand. Please let me say this. I know I've apologized and I know you've forgiven me. But I need to say that what I did was wrong. Not because of Grandma's history, not because of Dad's abandonment, not because of the drinking. It was wrong because you're my mother. And I love you, and hurting someone you love is never okay. Tears filled my eyes, not tears of pain, but of profound gratitude for the man my son was becoming. Thank you, Marcus, I whispered. That means more than you know. He pulled me into a hug, a real solid present hug. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Not because I have to, but because I want to. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how far we'd come. The journey had been harder than I could have imagined, more painful than I thought we could survive. But we had survived. More than that, we had thrived. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning, the kind of call that changes everything. It was David, his voice strained and unfamiliar. Amara, he said, I need to see Marcus. I'm sick. It's serious. When I told Marcus, he was quiet for a long time, processing this new complication in his recovery. What do you want to do? I asked gently. He took a deep breath. I need to see him. Not for him, for me. I have things I need to say. We met David at a neutral coffee shop, the 3 of us together for the first time in a decade. He looked older, thinner. The confident man I remembered replaced by someone diminished and afraid. Marcus, he began, his voice trembling. I'm so sorry. For everything. For leaving. For lying. for not being the father you deserved. Marcus listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When David finished, he spoke with a calm authority that surprised us both. "Thank you for apologizing," he said. "I forgive you, not because what you did was okay, but because carrying anger toward you is hurting me. But I need you to understand something. Your choices have consequences. You have another daughter now. Don't make the same mistakes with her." David's eyes filled with tears. "You're a better man than I am, son." "No," Marcus said gently. "I'm just a man who's learned from your mistakes." As we drove home, Marcus was quiet, processing the encounter. When we pulled into the driveway, he turned to me. "You know what I realized today?" he said. "I used to be so angry that Dad left us. But if he hadn't, I might have grown up to be just like him. And I don't want to be like him. I want to be like you, strong, resilient, willing to do hard things for the people you love." The circle was complete. The boy who had once blamed me for his father's absence now saw my strength as his inheritance. That night, we sat on the porch watching the sunset, the same way we had when he was a boy. The neighborhood was quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the chirping of crickets. "You know," Marcus said, breaking the comfortable silence, "that breakfast you made me, the one with the police and Sarah waiting? That was the best thing anyone has ever done for me." I looked at him surprised. "Even though it felt like betrayal at the time?" "Especially because it felt like betrayal at the time," he said. "You loved me enough to let me hate you. You loved me enough to do what was hard instead of what was easy. You loved me enough to save me from myself." Tears streamed down my face, healing tears, grateful tears. "We saved each other," I whispered. He took my hand, his grip strong and sure. "Yeah, Mom. I guess we did." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the same colors as that morning months ago when I'd driven away from new beginnings, full of hope and fear. Now, sitting beside my son, this strong, sober, beautiful man, I felt only peace. The storm had passed. The healing had taken root. And whatever came next, we would face it together. Not as victims of our past, but as architects of our future. My son had laid a hand on me, and I had served him justice with his breakfast. But what we both received was something far greater: redemption, understanding, and a love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger than ever. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I understood the final, most important truth. The strongest foundations aren't built on perfection. They're built on the rubble of our mistakes, fortified by forgiveness, and illuminated by the grace of second chances.